morning, everybody. My name is Rosalinda Dorado. I am the Civic Engagement Program Director with El Centro de Igualdad y Derechos. Thank you all for coming today. El Centro is an Albuquerque-based immigrant rights workers' justice organization in Albuquerque with over 5,500 members, the majority of whom are low-wage immigrant workers. We are proud of the decade-long legacy that we have, and many in this room have built in New Mexico, including passing policies which recognize the vast contributions of immigrants in the economy, civil and cultural fiber of our state. Immigrants in the state contribute with over $1 billion in taxes. About 11% in New Mexico's workforce are immigrant workers. Immigrant workers and business owners contribute with $12 billion in economic output in New Mexico. Immigrants count for 15.4% of small business owners and 2.1% of the construction workforce in this state. Here in Albuquerque, we passed our first immigrant-friendly public safety policy in the year 2000. We know from lived experience that our local policies are conducive to the promotion of public safety, economic development, and keeping our families together. In the wake of the promise of mass deportations, dozens of executive orders, raids from other states, and reversal of the Department of Homeland Security, guidance requires ICE to refrain from immigrant enforcement actions to certain areas, previously as sensitive locations, such as schools and places where children gather, hospitals, places of worship. We are here that immigrant communities are afraid. Many New Mexicans are now afraid to go to Mass. We are hearing from immigrant domestic violence survivors are suffering in silence, that parents are making the impossible decision between risking their family separation and keeping their children in schools. We are hearing that immigrant families are too afraid to go to hospitals, are taking their U.S. citizen children out of safety net benefits and do not feel safe interacting with the government agencies, including getting a driver's license and calling for first responders. I know firsthand the devastating impact of family separation. I have seen the fear instilled in our communities, the way it shook mothers, fathers, and siblings to the core, knowing that their loved ones could be taken from them. My brother's deportation in the year 2010 was shocking and ripped far beyond our family. He, like the vast majority of immigrants getting detained in ICE, was a college student in the verge of earning his bachelor's degree with no prior contact with law enforcement. Yet, on his day to school, he was pulled over, unlawfully detained, handed over to ICE, and deported the very next day. But I was not the only one who lost my brother. Our communities lost him. The church where he was a youth leader lost him. The youth soccer league where he coached lost him. His deportation represents a tearing apart our communities, the loss of a role model, a mentor, and a friend. Family separation is not just about individual deportation. It is about breaking communities And that's why, despite the fear, we continue to step up and speak out and organize to protect our families in our communities. Although many jurisdictions here in New Mexico, including Albuquerque, Bernalillo, have local non-disclosure policies which ensure that no local resources are used to aid the enforcement of federal immigration law, there currently are no protections at the state level, leaving New Mexican communities vulnerable. We are proud that all federal, state, and local level communities continue to organize, and we have champions who are rolling up their sleeves and working mano a mano with our communities to keep families together. Today, we are here to show our support statewide legislation. So before we invite up Marcela from Somos Acción to speak, we would like to recognize the following organizations who are here in support and individuals who are here in support. NVR, the City of Albuquerque, Caridades Católicas, Enlace Comunitario, Encuentro, New Mexico Dream Team, OPIN, St. Michael's and All Angels, AFT, CLP, Indivisible Rio Grande, PCA, Somos, New Mexico Voices for Children, New Mexico Conference of Churches, the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, Office of Equity and Inclusion, OIRA, City Government and Affairs, Albuquerque, New Mexico Asian Family Center. Let's give a round of applause to all these organizations who are stepping up. Now I would like to invite Marcela Diaz from Somos Acción to discuss SB250 and SB36. Over the past 30 years, Somos has been the forefront of immigrant rights and workers' justice movements in New Mexico, and we are proud to be organizing with our members in support of these bills, who they are spearheading. Marcela?
Thank you. Thank you, Rosalinda. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today, and thanks to El Centro Poder y Acción for organizing this press conference and for really helping organize all the groups that are in Albuquerque doing incredible work at the local level and at the state level to support our families, protect us from detention, deportation, separation of families, and certainly destabilization of local economies and businesses. So Somos Un Pueblo Unido, our 501c3 sister organization, and Somos Acción is a statewide organization. We're in 8 counties. We mostly organize in rural communities where some of the fears and tensions and anxieties are particularly acute because in many of these communities, they do not have the kinds of protective and non-discrimination policies and non-disclosure policies that Albuquerque enjoys along with many other cities and counties across the state. So as Rosalinda mentioned, these are harrowing times for our families and our children. The ramped up deportations and the threats of detention have certainly had a chilling effect on victims of crime, witnesses, and communities as a whole, and they are changing the everyday decision-making of our familias and our communities. Do we take our kids to school? We've seen a decrease or an increase of absenteeism across the state in the public school system. Do we take our kids to the doctor? Do we drive our kids? Do we drive to work? Do we engage in the necessary and important everyday activities that everyone engages in to create a vibrant state and city and counties? And so those are the things that we are trying to help those are the things that we are trying to help protect through some of this state legislation policy. As Rosalinda also mentioned, New Mexico truly has a decades-long tradition of integrating immigrants, regardless of immigration status, into important and crucial public safety measures. So in 2003, and we've seen many iterations of this, as I'm sure many of you know, the state of New Mexico decided to ensure that immigrant residents of our state, regardless of their status, get driver's licenses, get insured, take their tests, and one of the effects of that driver's license law is that they are willingly coming forward and giving all of their information and creating a driving record that MVD has, and so that helps public safety measures. We also see, not just in Albuquerque and Bernalillo County, non-discrimination policies that were implemented in the late 90s and the early aughts as a result of another big immigration reform in 1996 that also threatened a lot of the livelihoods of our communities and families. We saw really strong non-discrimination policies. Local law enforcement, city agencies, county sheriffs weren't going to ask about immigration status, use local resources to enforce or help, back then INS, now ICE, enforce those immigration laws that have not been updated really since the mid-90s. And so those are really, we have that strong tradition. Over 2 dozen policies were passed at the city and county level across the state in the early aughts. And then in 2017, when we saw another onslaught of threats and targeting by the first Trump administration, we as cities and counties stepped up, strengthened those policies, and despite the threats by the administration, and many of our cities and counties across the country, including Albuquerque, sued the federal government for actually trying to threaten our constitutional right as municipalities and counties to actually ensure that we were not using our local resources to support in the deportation and separation of our families. And so that is our legacy in New Mexico, and that is a bottom-up legacy that has really served our public safety interests well and that have integrated, not alienated, mixed status families. But there are still holes. MVD currently, and it's not that they want to be doing this, that there are no protections in state law currently. MVD sells our information, our MVD data, to a private data broker called New Mexico Interactive, which then packages it and provides it to both governmental and non-governmental agencies. The non-governmental agencies are private data brokers like LexisNexis, Experian, Thomson Reuters that have multi-million-dollar contracts with ICE. And we know because of FOIAs that have happened at the national level and the federal level that ICE really does use that information through these private data brokers to locate and to investigate people for being in the country without the proper documentation or as undocumented immigrants or for residing in the country in that way. And so these are the things that we need to close that spigot, and that's what we're here to talk about today. In addition to that, this is another big hole, about 60% of the foreign-born population, or our familias, live in cities or counties that have those non-disclosure policies of sensitive information, that have those non-discrimination policies when it comes to accessing emergency services, law enforcement, public safety resources. But about 40% of the immigrant population in New Mexico, particularly in rural communities, and some in oil and gas communities where we are greatly contributing to the economic well-being of the state as immigrant oil and gas workers, they do not live in a city or a county where that is the case. And so you can be driving from Albuquerque, you go to work in Albuquerque, you can be driving home to Santa Fe, but you have to cross counties, for instance, that do not have those policies. So what we're trying to do is create some uniform policies at the state level so that every New Mexican feels safe to call the police, to access emergency services, to participate in all of the public safety measures, initiatives, and efforts that we continue to improve in this state. And so there are two major bills that we are following and that are coursing through the legislature. One, I think, is actually going to get heard today on the Senate floor. It's Senate Bill 36, sponsored by Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez and Representative Cristina Paraon, who are both representatives of districts here in Albuquerque. And it's the Non-Disclosure of Sensitive Information Act. What we know is that for state government or local government to function properly and efficiently, they need to obtain sensitive personal information from the citizens of New Mexico. And we, as citizens of New Mexico, have a reasonable expectation that that information remains confidential and doesn't get into the wrong hands. And so this bill would would prohibit state employees from sharing information that they obtained through their job about the sensitive personal information of New Mexicans. So it can be their immigration status, their LGBTQ status, their status as a crime victim, their status as recipients of public assistance. These are things that could potentially put a target on our backs when it comes to some of the federal government's policies right now, but it can also make us more vulnerable to hate crimes and other targeting in our communities. And so we want to make sure that that information is safeguarded and that it's clear that there's a uniform policy across the state that they are not going to be sharing that sensitive personal information because they need it from us. And we are demanding that they not share that. We also want to narrow the ability of MVD to sell the information without ensuring that the end users of our MVD data, our photos, our last known address, all of that information that is a part of our driving record and MVD's database is not being shared with either data brokers or government agencies that will share it with ICE for the purposes of, or any federal agency for the purposes of immigration enforcement. And so that is a key bill that is coursing through the legislature. We have a little bipartisan support in the committee process, and we'll see how it all plays out on the floor either today or later on this week. The other bill that Senator Mo Maestas and Representative Yanira Gurola, also of Albuquerque, and Senator Nava are moving forward in the legislature is Senate Bill 250, and this is no local resources for immigration enforcement. We know that cities like Albuquerque and Santa Fe and Las Cruces and Taos and Rio Arriba as a county, Las Vegas, New Mexico, they already have policies on the books ensuring that they're not going to use their limited public resources, public safety resources, to make people shy away from law enforcement and emergency services and victims' rights services and survivor services, but that they're actively participating in those efforts. And so what we know is that we need that protection, that uniform protection at the state level. And so that is what that bill would do. It would ensure that the state and all of its political subdivisions not use the money, the resources that immigrants as essential workers have helped generate for the state against us, to separate our families, to terrorize our communities, and to disallow us from actually participating in the public safety efforts that we all need to rely on each other in this great state. So those are the two bills that are coursing through, and we really appreciate Albuquerque and the incredible immigrants' rights movement here, as well as all the other organizations that we're working with, and we've coalesced around this immigrant public safety package at the legislature. What we know, public safety is on the mind. You're going to hear about it. You're going to see it. You're going to report on it at the state level and the state legislature. You cannot have efficient public safety policies if you are excluding 200,000 mixed status families from those policies. And if we do not pass these policies, that's exactly what would be happening. So with that, I will be here to answer questions, but I will turn it over back to Rosalinda. Thank you, everyone. Oh, I have I brought extra copies of a report that Somos un Pueblo Unido, Just Futures Law, and Mi Gente put together recently. It's 2 years of research about how ICE accesses New Mexico's residents' personal data and information. This is precisely why we're needing to move at the state level to provide more protections. Thank you.
Thank you again, Marcela, for the amazing information, and we will continue to push forward those two bills in collaboration. Now let's hear from the Albuquerque Mayor, Tim Keller. Who, alongside the Office of Equality and Inclusion, the Office of Immigrant and Refugees Affairs, their policy team, and many other city councilors have ensured that Albuquerque remains immigrant-friendly. We are also proud that they are putting into action the city's One Albuquerque slogan. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning, and I want to just begin by saying how my heart is filled with gratitude for everyone who is speaking today, for everyone who is here today, and also to be living in this place in New Mexico and in Albuquerque, which by and large, we are proudly an immigrant-friendly place. We'll talk about what that means, and I think Mariella's comments, she walked us through a little bit of the history on this issue. And I just want to also touch on that first because personally, I know that it's now almost been about 20 years since I've been fighting for these issues and for immigrant rights. And it started with the fight for driver's license at the Roundhouse. And I'm sharing that, one, because it's a surprise to no one that I care a lot about this. And also, that also means my stance is not going to change. It hasn't for 20 years. And it doesn't matter who's president or what pressure they put on us. That's also important because this is not our first rodeo. And when I say our, it's everyone that is here today. It is every organization that is here. It's by far and away most of our city councilors, our county commissioners, our state legislators. The leadership throughout New Mexico is no stranger to these issues. And time again, we side with immigrants. And so we are ready. We know what is going to happen more or less, and we know how to deal with it more or less. And for us, I think that is really important. That's also why I am grateful to be here today, because it is a reminder that this community is strong and resilient no matter what happens. And that goes also for our elected officials. That also includes our faith leaders, including our Catholic Church. This is not their first time or any of the other faith leaders dealing with trying to protect everyone, and I mean everyone in our city, regardless of their status. And so for me, it does make me grateful to be a Burqueño and to be a New Mexican. Now, our city policy, like a lot of the state initiatives, is very simple and it's very basic, and it really is about non-disclosure. It just simply says that no city worker or city resource can be used to check or work on status of anyone's immigration situation. That's it. You know, people often will ask me all these questions about what our policy is and this kind of thing. It's very simple. Like, our policy is we just don't engage in that discussion in any way. That also means saving data. So I do think, in comparison to maybe some other cities and communities, there's also no data in Albuquerque for anyone to take or use. And that's very important. That's why that state bill is also so important. And I know there are reasons for this, and I'll just touch on them briefly. But I also just want to be really clear. That means when someone comes to town and is trying to figure out whose status is what status and all this, not only are we not allowed to share, but we don't even have the data, right? And that's what really messes with what our president's trying to do. Because no matter what he does, there's no data to get. So this is really important to understand how this works. It is about non-disclosure. That's really what it's about. It's also about sort of non-collection. Now, I'll touch on what these things mean because they're also summarized, and we want people to know their rights. And, you know, we have in the city of Albuquerque, first off, an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, and we've had that for over a decade. This is another example where, for us, this is not new, this is not some cutting-edge thing or some fad. We have been supporting our immigrant communities for a long time, and we're going to keep doing that. And that's part of our Office of Equity and Inclusion. And we're also not afraid to say those words, by the way. We're proud of our Office of Equity and Inclusion. Give them a round of applause. And I have to say, one thing when a lot of this started in the most recent fashion, we have these red cards that we've made, and of course they're in 2 languages. And a lot of the advocates and groups here help put this together that we try and make available at every public facility in the city. And I thought it was especially powerful. You know, my kids, so my kids go to public school. It's not a surprise to anyone, but my daughter gave me this card, and she said, this is what we're handing out at school to help our classmates. That's awesome, right? And our kids get it, right? They just see other kids, and they know they don't want those kids to be without parents or without a pickup from school. It's very intuitive to them, and that's one of the reasons why this is so important. These policies have been a part of New Mexico for 2 reasons for so long. Number 1 is public safety. This notion that if you're a victim of something like domestic violence, or if you need to call emergency services, that you have to trust APD. You have to trust AFR. You can do that in Albuquerque because of the non-disclosure policy. So this is important. And literally, look, we know we have problems with narcotics and all this other stuff in our city, but we need the entire community to work with our law enforcement to stop those problems. So I also want to make it clear that APD will arrest anyone who is doing illegal activity regardless of their status. That is what they do, and that is what they will continue to do. But we need the whole community's help to do that. That's why we have to trust each other. But the other thing that my daughter and every kid in New Mexico understands intuitively, and I think is a New Mexican value, which is the value of family, right? Every time when we make this case for immigrant protections, the reason why the majority of New Mexico agrees with us is because we understand the concept that families are better off together. Parents need to have the support network they have for their kids. They need to be able to go to the hospital. They need to be able to take their kids to the library. And kids obviously need their parent. We are all better off with families together. That is what our children understand, and that is also what historically the vast majority of New Mexicans have understood. That is the last thing I'm going to leave you with, which is that what's amazing, what I tell other people from other cities who are dealing with this is, I wish you could be in Albuquerque, because this actually isn't that controversial here. You know, these policies have been supported for a long time. That's right. And sure, it's because of the hard work and the courage of a lot of folks around here, but it's also because it's who we are. We are New Mexicans. We understand that family is a New Mexico value, and supporting families means supporting immigrant families and means keeping families together. So for us, this is not actually that difficult. We know this. We just have to be reminded of it from time to time. And so with that, I am grateful to live here and stand with all of you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you to our mayor, Tim Keller. Our next speaker, I would like to invite Mary Ellen Garcia, Executive Director of New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence. The coalition, 32 organizations strong, has been an instrument in advocating for public safety policies inclusive of immigrant survivors of domestic violence. Mary? Oh, Miranda.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna move this down a little. Good morning, everyone. You're going to think the mayor and I actually planned our talking points today together, but I do stand before you as the CEO of the New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and I stand alongside, and I just want to take a moment to honor the survivors and advocates and leaders from across New Mexico to speak in strong support of the Senate bills 36 and 250, and to talk about how these are not just about policy. They are about public safety. They are about trust in our institutions. They are about ensuring that all New Mexicans can live without fear of violence or retaliation. And the survivors of domestic violence that we work with and survivors of crime rely on the confidential support systems to escape dangerous situations and to rebuild their lives. Yet without strong protections here in New Mexico for their personal information, state systems meant to protect them can instead be weaponized by the abusers who are harming our survivors. Failure to safeguard survivor data and survivor information creates an incredibly serious public safety risk, making it easier for those who cause harm to track, stalk, and retaliate against victims of crime. Trust in institutions crumbles when survivors fear their personal information will be shared, discouraging them from reporting their abuse, seeking medical care, or engaging within law enforcement. In a 3-year period, the 32 network domestic violence providers served 18,500 shelter victims in a 3-year period. Without this information being protected, many of those survivors are at risk. And we know that this is especially true for our immigrant survivors of domestic violence and crime, many of whom fear seeking help could expose them to deportation and further victimization. I want to be really, really clear. No survivor of crime, no domestic violence survivor should have to choose between their safety and their privacy. When personal information isn't protected, trust in our institutions breaks down, abusers go unpunished, and public safety is compromised. Senate Bill 36 is not just about confidentiality. It's about survival, it's about justice, and it's about ensuring that no system that is meant to protect victims becomes a tool for their harm. Senate Bill 36 upholds our values of trust, of safety, accountability. It ensures that the agencies that we seek cannot disclose sensitive information and have it be weaponized against us. It empowers survivors in our communities to come forward, to seek justice, and to rebuild their lives without fear. Public safety should be for all New Mexicans, regardless of their immigration status. Yet, when local agencies divert resources to enforce federal immigration laws, they create fear in immigration communities, preventing people from reporting their crimes, seeking protections, or accessing life-saving services. When trust in our law enforcement and criminal justice system breaks down, entire communities become less safe. Survivors of domestic violence, of human trafficking, and other violent crimes are less likely to come forward when they fear that seeking help could result in detention, family separation, or deportation. Senate Bill 250 is a critical step towards ensuring that every single New Mexican, regardless of their status, can access our emergency services, report crimes, and seek assistance without fear. Our communities are safer when trust between our local agencies and immigrant families remains strong. Let me repeat that. Our communities are safer when trust between our local agencies and our immigrant families remains strong. Diverting our local resources to enforce federal immigration laws not only undermines public safety, but also drains the critical funding from essential services. This bill, Senate Bill 250, reaffirms that public safety should serve all residents, keeping families together and strengthening the bonds between our law enforcement and criminal justice system and the communities in which they protect. We urge our lawmakers to stand with survivors of domestic violence, survivors of crime, our immigrant families, and all of our communities across New Mexico by ensuring that the passage of Senate Bill 36 and 250 are passed. And I want to highlight that our children are watching. As the mayor said, our children are watching how we are protecting our communities. And it is time for us to stand together and show them that we stand with survivors and we stand with our communities. Survivors are counting on us, our immigrant families are counting on us, and our communities are counting on us. Thank you.
Up next, our next speaker. The Archdiocese of Santa Fe has a long track record of supporting immigrant integration policies, local and state level, and opening up their parish to Know Your Rights workshops. I would like to invite the Archbishop Wester, the New Mexico Conference of Catholic Bishops. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here today with Alan Sanchez, the director of our New Mexico Conference of Catholic Bishops. And I just want to say what a privilege it is to speak and how grateful I am personally to our mayor, Mayor Keller, to El Centro, to Somos Unidos, Somos Acción, and all these other organizations that are speaking up for our immigrant brothers and sisters. Very common across all of our religious beliefs. The Matthew 25 speaks to all of us. Jesus said, as often you did it to these, you did it to the least of my brethren, you did it to me. Matthew 25 lays the foundation for the respect that is due to all human beings, and especially the most vulnerable in our midst, especially immigrants, forced immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. And that is why Senate Bill 250 and Senate Bill 36 are so important. They treat our fellow human beings with respect and uphold our New Mexico resolve to respect the God-given rights and dignity of those who come to us from other countries, following the majority of all of us who've come here from other places to live here in New Mexico. These bills give assurance to immigrants in New Mexico that they can trust local authorities, that they can access help when needed, and that they do not need to fear being caught up in the unjust mass deportations that we are beginning to see take place in our country. To be clear, every sovereign country has the right and indeed the responsibility to have safe and secure borders, but it is not an absolute right. Countries must also consider God-given rights and the inalienable rights of the human person. Comprehensive immigration reform is the answer, one that has eluded our Congress for decades. Mass deportations are not the answer. It is a political gimmick that causes fear, broken families, shattered lives, and endless suffering. The trumped-up reasons for mass deportation are false and misleading. Immigrants, as a class, if you will, are more law-abiding than most citizens in our country, and statistically. Immigrants have been dehumanized and demonized by false accusations. Immigrants are misrepresented and intentionally vilified when they are referred to with terms reserved for natural disasters, such as tsunamis and waves and invasions and overrun. Immigrants are falsely assumed to be opportunists and conniving when in fact they are escaping unjust political, economic, and justice systems that prey upon them and their children. Gangs, drug cartels, criminal cartels, human traffickers, and unscrupulous opportunists make immigrants' lives unbearable and impossible. Bishop Seitz of El Paso and I visited Tegucigalpa a few years ago, and we spoke personally to a family in one of the colonias of the IDPs there. And they explained to us their situation, that the father had been shot in the leg, the wife had been shot in the wrist by gangs who had riddled their home with bullets. This is just one of many, many, many examples of what many of our immigrants go through in their countries of origin. And so we must look at immigration from all sides, not just from a politically expedient vantage point. We must care for our neighbor and welcome the stranger in our midst, especially when that stranger is helping to put food on our tables, build our houses, care for our children and elderly parents, and stand shoulder to shoulder with all of us in upholding the values that make New Mexico such a wonderful state. I thank our civic leaders here in New Mexico for promoting Senate Bills 250 and 36. I thank God that New Mexico gets it. We are indeed our brothers and sisters keepers, and we do recognize that when we do it for the least of our brethren, we're doing it for the Lord Jesus. Thank you.
I'm much taller than I am. Now I would like to invite up Sonia Romero Autry, the Albuquerque Teachers Federation Elementary Vice President, who will be speaking to the impact of the current political climate on our children. Sonia?
Hello. Hola, bienvenidos. I've had the great privilege of being an educator for the last 28 years and a union member since I became a teacher. As educators, we strive to create classrooms that are safe and that embrace the beautiful diversity that comes to us every year. Our classrooms become families and communities. But what I have experienced is that whatever is happening outside in the world directly impacts our students inside the classrooms. So when one of our students hurts or suffers, we all hurt and we all suffer. But not just my classroom and the students, but the entire school. We do our best to circle around our students and protect them no matter what. But sometimes we feel powerless because this fight requires all of us. For example, many of my colleagues and myself have had students come into our classrooms with phone numbers in their pockets or written on the back of their jackets or shirts, should there be some kind of separation. That kind of fear is palpable in every corner of our schools and classrooms. I have sat countless times with hurting mothers and fathers and grandmothers, tíos y tías and abuelos, asking that we take their children home with us should something happen to them. I have urged many families to report abuse or to take their children to hospitals, but fear of separation or deportation by law enforcement often creates fear where they are unwilling to get the support that they desperately need to protect themselves and their children, thus creating even bigger traumas because of fear. I have a personal story of where I had a young mother and little girl in my classroom, and the mother would often come and stay in my classroom all day long with her daughter, learning English, volunteering, and I knew that something was going on with her at home, and I begged her to please get some help, and fear of what she thought would happen to her didn't allow her to do so. We tried to get her as many supports as possible. One day, she never came back with that little girl. And to this day, when I'm walking the streets or I go to a restaurant or even look in this crowd, I scan to see if I see their faces. I don't know where they are, and I don't know what happened to them. As educators, we depend and we rely on our communities, our constituents, and our policymakers to ensure that we can continue to protect our students, their families, and the communities they come from. As educators, we have way too many stories of this kind of trauma and impact. And while great feelings of despair often settle in, we never stop doing what is best for kids. Never. We know that our state legislator and governor can do more to also stand in defense of our immigrant working neighbors, and that's why we are here. We are here to urge our state legislators and our governor to pass and to sign Senate Bill 36 and Senate Bill 250. We need them to do what we are already doing ourselves, doing everything we can to keep each other safe. We are partnering with Organized Power in Numbers to train our union members here in Albuquerque on what to do if ICE ever shows up at a school and to have a rapid response teams at schools. If we can find every possible way to be ready to defend and fight for our immigrant brothers and sisters, our state government should be able to do exactly the same. Thank you for your time.
Now let's invite Teresa Garcia, the City of Albuquerque Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Commission, to speak. The commission is unique in that it's made up of cultural specific services providers, a shelter, law enforcement agencies, the district attorney's office, the attorney general's office, and the Second Judicial District Court, amongst others. Please give a round of applause for Teresa.
Good morning, everybody. I am joined by commission members right behind me. Cheche Alipat from New Mexico Asian Family Center, Sachi from New Mexico Asian Family Center, she's the executive director, and also Bonnie Escobar from Enlace Comunitario. You guys can come up here. Buenos dias, good morning. My name is Teresa Garcia, a first-generation Mexican indigenous daughter of an immigrant, descendant of the Tarahumara tribe in Parral, Chihuahua, and I am honored to speak on behalf of the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Commission for the City of Albuquerque, which I chair with my co-chair, Cherie Alipat. Our commission is made up of culturally specific service providers such as Enlace Comunitario and the New Mexico Asian Family Center, a shelter, Safe House New Mexico, law enforcement agencies such as BCSO and APD, as well as the District Attorney's Office and Attorney General's Office and the Second Judicial District Court, among others. Together, we work to support survivors, strengthen collaboration, improve training, shape policy, and address systemic barriers and leading survivor-centered work, ensuring safety of our most vulnerable communities, including immigrant survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. We know that fear of deportation and retaliation prevents many survivors from seeking help, leaving them trapped in dangerous and abusive situations. No one should have to choose between their safety and the risk of family separation. This reality not only harms survivors, but also undermines public policy and weakens trust in every system designed to protect all residents in New Mexico. Immigrant family workers who are business owners and taxpayers are vital to our community and our economy. Their contributions should be honored and not weaponized against them. That is why I ask community to strongly support SB250 and SB36, critical legislation that ensures state and local resources are used to protect, not prosecute, our communities. These bills will limit the disclosure of sensitive personal information and ensure that local agencies are not forced to act as extensions of federal immigration enforcement. No survivor should have to choose between safety and deportation when leaving an abusive situation or separation of their family by seeking safety of life-saving resources for themselves and their children, furthering the harm and trauma. The City of Albuquerque and the State of New Mexico are stronger when everybody has safety, justice, and support, regardless of immigration status. These bills uphold values of protecting families, fostering trust, and ensuring survivors have the resources they need to break free from violence. I urge our leaders to stand with survivors, stand with our immigrant community, because every person deserves to live free from violence and fear. No están solos, estamos con ustedes. Muchas gracias.
It's time now to invite Laura Escorza, a domestic violence community educator from Enlace Comunitario, who can speak from the community perspective of why we need statewide protections. Enlace Comunitario has played a pivoted role since the year 2000 in supporting local immigrant public safety policies. Laura?
Good morning. Buenos días. Mi nombre es Laura Escorza. Soy promotora de Enlace Comunitario. Trabajo, soy madre de 3 hijos. Soy sobreviviente de violencia doméstica y sirvo a mi comunidad de diferentes maneras. Y llevo con orgullo mi identidad y mi historia. Hoy estoy aquí no solo para expresar mis preocupaciones, sino para resaltar la urgencia de proteger a los inmigrantes. No se trata solo de una cuestión de derechos humanos, sino de una necesidad fundamental para garantizar la seguridad pública y el bienestar de toda nuestra comunidad. Como sobreviviente, sé de primera mano lo que es sentir miedo. Miedo no solo por mi seguridad, sino por la posibilidad de buscar ayuda, ya que buscar ayuda en estos momentos significa la separación de la familia. Desafortunadamente, este es el miedo que muchas víctimas inmigrantes enfrentan todos los días en Nuevo México. Muchas mujeres permanecen atrapadas en ciclos de abuso porque temen que al denunciar a su agresor, las autoridades puedan enfocarse más en su estatus migratorio que en su protección y en su bienestar. Este temor las obliga a sufrir en silencio, alejándola de los recursos de ayuda que podrían salvar sus vidas. No podemos permitir que esto siga sucediendo. SB250 y SB36 son esenciales para nuestra comunidad. Estas propuestas protegen la privacidad de nuestras familias y garantizan que nadie tenga que elegir entre su seguridad y su estatus migratorio. Todos estamos más seguros cuando cada persona en nuestra comunidad se siente protegida al buscar ayuda, denunciar un crimen o acceder a servicios básicos sin miedo a ser entregada a las autoridades migratorias. Enlace Comunitario trabaja con cientos de sobrevivientes cada año y hemos visto cómo las políticas de privacidad y confianza pueden marcar la diferencia entre una persona que escapa del abuso y una que se queda atrapada en el miedo. Si realmente queremos promover la seguridad pública, debemos asegurar que nuestros recursos estatales y locales no sean utilizados para separar familias, sino para fortalecerlas. Nuevo México es un estado de valores, de comunidad y de unión. Proteger a los inmigrantes significa proteger a todos. Les pido a nuestros legisladores que apoyen SB250 y SB36 para que nadie tenga que vivir con miedo por simplemente buscar una vida mejor. Gracias.
Okay. We will be ending our press conference with a little bit of opening up our Q&A. So if anyone has any questions or for our speakers, for them to answer, this is the moment.